I'm very happy to welcome you all for this talk on eco-restoration and climate resilience by Dr. Nambi, or to commemorate the World Environment Day today. And let us pledge to nurture the nature to have a better future. And with this note, let me start the program. Let me invite our President, Mr. Srivatsram Wheels India, to give his opening remarks. And on the administrative front, let me request all of you to be on mute other than the speaker, and also post your questions in the Q&A box. It should be taken up after Dr. Nambi presents his talk. Over to you, Mr. Srivats.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to invite all of you for this talk on eco-restoration and climate resilience. It's been organized under the banner of Sustainable Chennai Forum of the Madras Chamber. We're happy to have with us today Dr. A. Nambi Appadurai, Director and Strategy Head Climate Resilience Practice of WRI, or the World Research Institute, amongst us today. Most of you will know a little bit about the chamber, but let me give you a brief intro. We were established in 1836. We're the second oldest chamber by a week or so in the country, and we're in our 185th year of service to trade and industry. In our 175th year, the Sustainable Chennai Forum was launched on 9th of November 2011 on the occasion of the World Habitat Day celebrations. The aim of this forum was to be a leading advocate for sustainable development and create a business case for sustainability to make our city, Chennai, an inclusive, sustainable, clean, urban city, and focus on areas like energy, waste management, water, transport, and urban greening. The Chamber, through the Sustainable Chennai Forum, is an associate partner of UN Habitat's World Urban Campaign. World Urban Campaign is an advocacy and partnership platform to raise awareness about positive urban change in order to achieve a green, productive, safe, healthy, inclusive, and well-planned urban network in the world. The Urban Campaign conceived the open space for exchange of ideas for urban stakeholders called the Urban Thinkers Campus. And for the last 4 years, we've been privileged to host the Urban Thinkers Campus, the first of its kind in Chennai under the World Urban Campaign. And we've covered subjects such as Chennai as a global city, roadmap to zero waste in Chennai, making Chennai water positive, and making Chennai a climate smart city. Today is the World Environment Day, and the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration is being launched today. It's supposed to be a 10-year push to halt and to reverse the decline of the natural world. As the current pandemic has disrupted normal lives, and the most important thing that will have a far-reaching impact is the breakdown, the relationship between human systems and natural systems. United Nations Environment Program campaign, Recreate, Reimagine, Restore, focuses on reversing, previous degradations of our ecosystem. Interestingly, during the pandemic, at least according to the naturalist David Attenborough, the natural world has thrived while we have struggled with the pandemic. But it's going to take a lot of focus for us to reverse what has already been kickstarted years ago. In the UN Biodiversity Summit on October 1st last year, India reiterated our commitment to restoring 26 million hectares of land by 2030. And this decade is declared as the decade for ecosystem restoration. And this will call for scaling up of efforts in restoration of degraded terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. In Tamil Nadu specifically, the Environment Management Agency of Tamil Nadu, called EMAT, executes various ecosystem activities through agencies such as municipal administration, water supply, public works, fisheries, and local bodies. Restoration and conservation of lakes at achieving water quality besides improving the biodiversity conservation and preservation of the ecosystems. We have restored, as a matter of fact, a lot of water bodies in the city, and presently about 180 water bodies have been restored. and desilting work on 20 more is actually in its final stages. The community participation plays an important role in this, and various corporates have also extended a helping hand towards ecosystem under the CSR of the companies. And it's time for all of us to make a positive contribution towards reversing what has happened to our planet. Climate change is no longer something that is likely to affect only future generations. It's upon us. We're already starting to see variations in climate pattern, which also affect people economically and have also caused a lot of disruption to lives. So it's right now one of the biggest challenges that we face in the decades to come, resulting in heat waves, floods, droughts, sea level rises, and other such things that affect vulnerable communities. The only commonality between COVID-19 and climate change is it affects everyone. So it's a challenge we have to take on together. The stage is set this year for the 26th Conference of the Parties, or COP26 as it's known, to be held in Glasgow in the UK in November 2021. And as an emerging economy, India represents the economic aspirations of its peers while shouldering a greater responsibility towards climate action as a world power and one of the top greenhouse gas emitters in the world. We're already a leader in green, inclusive, and resilient development. And among the top renewable energy installers in the world, we have actually spearheaded a large public program for adoption of energy efficient lighting, connecting millions to the world. But as a growing economy, the burden is on us, much as we are likely to grow much more than a lot of the other developed countries. The burden is on us to be able to achieve this while not degrading our environment further. And that calls for a lot of policy related changes and much more technology adaptation than we've actually seen. Because of India's leading position in terms of economic development in the years to come, our role will be decisive at Glasgow. Tamil Nadu per se is also not far behind in terms of its aspiration. The Tamil Nadu State Action Plan on Climate Change has recently released a draft of the revamped map on climate change. There's 7 sectors which are going to be revamped to suit the changing climate changes. The government aims to undertake almost 200 different activities under each of these sectors, for which fund allocation has been proposed over the next decade. And the priority will be given to this in addressing the relative vulnerability due to climate change. India has played a prominent role in forming the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, and much of the National Development Agenda is mirrored in the Sustainable Development Goals. And achieving the progress of the world to meet the Sustainable Development Goals depends on India's progress, as our footprint is relatively large. Niti Aayog has also constructed an SDG India Index, which gives a holistic view on social, economic, and environmental status of the country and each of its states and union territories. This index is a tool to tell us where we are, and a dashboard that people can refer to. Recently, it also came out in the newspaper. I think Kerala was topped it, followed by Himachal and Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has actually made some progress in the recent rankings. Resilience cannot be possible without us adapting. Actions taken by communities and countries can withstand climate change, but it's not possible without also some amount of restoration. The World Research Institute works to accelerate adaptation action and support by working with governments and multilateral institutions and communities. They also work to build resilience by advancing critical adoption initiatives and research on multiple areas. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Nambi on a busy day today, World Environment Day, to share his thoughts and experience with us on this above subject. Once again, welcome to all of you, and Welcome and thanks for being with us, Dr. Nambi.
Thank you, Mr. President. Leo Tolstoy said that one of the first conditions of happiness is that the link between the man and nature shall not be broken. Unfortunately, we have done enough damages to that. And probably this World Environment Day is to introspect what are the wrongs we have done and how to correct it. And as Mr. Srivatsram said, we have a very excellent speaker here before us. And I would now request him, but before request Dr. Nambi to make his presentation, but let me take the pleasure of introducing him before I invite him to the screen to present. Dr. Nambi Abadurai currently serves as the Director of the Climate Resilience Practice of World Resource Institute, WRI India. He has about 20 years of experience in the development sector. His overarching research interest intersects the areas of climate risk management, adaptation, environment policy, institutional development, and governance. Nambi has a wide range of research and project management experience at the national, subnational, and international levels. His international career includes very impressive list of including the World Bank, the CGIAR, and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Program. In the past, Mr. Nambi served as a member of the official Indian delegate of UNFCCC conference to parties meetings and participated as an expert member of several scientific committees constituted by various ministries of Government of India and state governments. He has a doctoral degree in public policy from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs of Syracuse University, New York, and postgraduate degrees in development studies from Cambridge University, UK, and in public management from University of Madras. He has published widely on developmental and environmental issues and has won several awards in the field of social research development. Without further ado, can I invite Dr. Nambi to present on this topic of the day, eco-restoration and climate resilience. Over to you, Dr. Nambi.
You're muted, Dr. Nambi.
How many times it happens? I've never learned. Thank you for the kind words, Ms. Madhumati and Ms. Saraswati, and who have been working behind the scenes to get me here. It's such a privilege to be part of this event on a very important day. This morning I attended the UN's launch. The regional office from UNEP launched the program, the Decade of Ecosystem Revival. I mean, it is such an important occasion to be part of this and share a bit of whatever I learned from this whole experience of the past couple of decades working in this area. I would also like to kind of, let you know that at the outset, I'm not technologist by training. I'm a public policy person, and my training is very much on governance, institution building. So, but though I would like to give a kind of a bird's eye view of the kind of, ecosystem restoration experiences from different sectors to give a flavor of it. Not that, it's a huge area, as and it's very difficult to kind of cover everything, in this matter of 25 to 40 minutes. It's going to be a challenge. Nevertheless, it's important. Some of them might be a common knowledge, please bear with me, but still it's important that to reiterate the point, how important it is and what are the kind of technology and tools available today for us to kind of, and ultimately people that matter, whatever we are doing, there is good science is good policy, and, unless what is the benefit of science without, reaching the society? So we need to really look at from that holistic perspective of understanding things, from the people's point of view. So the bird's eye view is also important. The toad's eye view is also very important. But I'm going to really talk about the bird's eye view. Okay, let me move on to the first slide. Somebody's operating from that end. Okay, good. The outline of my talk is, provide some kind of one of the basic things, whatever, how ecosystem restoration is important, why it is important, all about these things, some of the basics, and then talk about a little bit of challenges, what we face today, and the kind of opportunities it extends. And then, with few examples, I will demonstrate the power of ecosystem restoration, and then try to kind of link it to some of the resilience activities and where we go from here. So that's the kind of a scheme of things. I'll try to stick on to this, and yeah, if there are anything, just hold on to your questions and then I could come back to you. So this particular slide shows the relationship, symbiotic relationship between nature and man. That's an important thing because we are here pushed to this level because of the human activity. Anthropocene activities are really very detrimental. Again, it boils down back to the environment development debate. So the systems are getting vulnerable, the ecosystems getting vulnerable, which provide the service to human well-being. So they are getting, and some way or other, it's impacted. And then, so the services what we derive is also kind of a sub-quality now. So it is, for a large extent, humans are also kind of, the reason for those things. So unsustainable management. And, there are different theories about it, as poverty and environment is also related. It's kind of, it's a vicious kind of a circle, where people are pulled into these things because they cannot really survive, externally without, disturbing the nature in some sense. So there are lots of theories about it. Let's not, but this is the two fundamental elements of, what you're looking at when you talk about ecosystems. So that's the reason I just want to kind of, so the idea of the whole talk is kind of, how to reverse this basically. What are the instruments available to us to kind of reverse this trend? And not that completely we can't reverse because we need to survive and we are so much dependent on nature. But still, it's important for us to see some of the pathways where how to get there using those pathways. Next slide, please. So, why ecosystems are important? That's an important question. What is an ecosystem in the first place? Ecosystems are web of life on Earth. It is very complex. It's all very interlinked. The web of life. It's every organism is dependent on others. That's why we could see, particularly what COVID has exposed us, that kind of how man has been really, how we have taken for granted. We have taken things for granted for so long, and not even a gram of this thing. Not even, it doesn't even weigh a gram. The virus, what we're talking about, brought the whole world under the knees. That's completely. Certainly, it's a very disturbing lesson, but it's important for us to recognize and realize, how vulnerable we are. So it's important in that context. You could see ecosystems values and the kind of the service what we derive out of it, and how it is important, how important it is for us to kind of safeguard. And so right from it exists in all scales, like I mentioned there, from a grain of soil to the entire planet, which includes a gamut of several systems like forests, wetlands, lakes, grasslands, estuaries, and rivers. It's a combination of these things. All these have some symbiotic relationship. When it is disturbed, certainly it is going to have an impact on the natural systems and thereby also social systems as well, which we have witnessed already. Particularly climate change is a great example of how it has been really impacting us in different ways. And it is also providing us some priceless benefits, which I'll talk about it a little later in depth. There's a stable climate it provides, and breathable air, good quality water for drinking, and for other uses, food, fiber, and other materials and wildlife, what we get out of these ecosystems. Next, please. So there are primary drivers. There are many drivers, but there are still, these are some of the primary drivers. The demographic changes which is happening around the world today. India is fighting the pandemic with positive resources because the kind of high number of population what we have. That's certainly we have grown in many sense. But then it is also important that nowadays it's very unfortunate that population debate has not been in the 80s and 70s and 80s. It has been one of the leading debates on population. For some reasons, it has been completely diluted today. It doesn't figure in the picture at all. So it's important to kind of understand and realize the effects of those things in the, be it economy or saving nature or whatever it is. Demographic changes play an important role, and poverty certainly poverty has a role. The vulnerabilities arising of different things pushes people to poverty, and poverty levels are really going down. You see what is happening today. India is 1 foot forward and about 10 foot backward today. Hopefully, it doesn't happen. With the kind of commitment what we have and the resources what we have, particularly the human resources. It shouldn't happen, but then one can't say. It all depends, and we have to wait and watch. Nobody has a clue which direction is going to take. But certainly, economy is taking a beating. That's very sure. And the poor and vulnerable are the people who've been affected anywhere by any kind of impact. It's first impact is on those people who've been really under the poverty line. So climate change is another factor which drives all these kind of detrimental effects. India is one of the fast urbanizing countries, as you know, and all our cities are really rapidly urbanizing. So that is a matter of concern. We need to really cautiously urbanize, which is certainly an important driver, which is changing the profile of the ecosystems. And globalization and trade is an important component as well. And the consumption patterns, certainly we were competing with the West today, despite having all the good ethics, and the traditions and culture what we have known for, but today it's breaking. So that is also a matter of concern for us. Apart from that, we also see the social and ethnic conflicts across the world. You see that that is also kind of proves detrimental to the ecosystems. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a slide from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and it's one of the first of its kind assessment, which is instituted in 2005. I was fortunate to be part of this process for a longer time, and one of the best studied, reports, certainly, which came out, which is consulted about 3,000 scientists across the world, different kinds of experts. So what you see here is, the kind of systems and goods and services what we derive out of the ecosystems. It is primarily divided into 4: the provisioning services, which really, provides services for our well-being, and it is also regulating services, certain things, like seed dispersal, climate regulation. They have a role. I mean, for everything, nature has a role in our lives in a big way. Some of them are very direct, some of them are not direct. And there are certain supporting services as well, provision of habitat. You could rather say it's tangible benefits and intangible benefits. Tangible are something which we really experience and see. Intangibles are something like cultural services, religious and spiritual services, what we derive out of this ecosystems, and particularly this region in Asia, and Africa. It is highly embedded in these cultural values, whatever. So it is important to recognize and realize that. And there is a kind of history to all these things. So we cannot completely devolve the history and start something completely new. It's important to bear that in mind. Even whatever the designs we come out with to manage our ecosystem should be based on those kind of ethics and those rich history, what we have, the traditional knowledge and the local knowledge, whatever we have. And that has to be incorporated. The science helps to a certain extent, but it should be built on the existing kind of knowledge. I just want to kind of underscore that a bit. Next slide, please. This one talks about the kind of linkages between the human well-being and the ecosystem services. I'm not going to dwell deep into that. There are certain strong linkages, there are certain weak linkages. As I told you, some of them have direct linkages, where we have in the day-to-day life, provisioning of water, for example, is a good example. The quality of water, certainly, for a human life, it is a very important component. So the links are very strong there. So I'll just leave it there, the slide, just to kind of show you the kind of the web of links what we have. Next one, please. So why it is important to restore the ecosystems? It is nothing new. We've been doing conservation for a long time. It is also, we are talking about sustainable development. It is all embedded in this, discourses and dialogues. The conservation ethics are very important, which we've been doing for a longer time. But only we have come at a stage where we are really finding no answers. The old methods are not working in some sense, particularly with the impact of climate change. The kind of the impacts what we have are rapidly eating us, and the farmers who have better knowledge to cope with from time immemorial, people are coping with. It's nothing new, adjusting to the weather patterns and stuff. But the rate at which it's impacting them is really, they're very difficult for them to cope up. And that's where science comes very handy in terms of providing this being proactive and providing that kind of a knowledge to prepare them for the outcomes of those things. That's ecological restoration also provides a vital role in equipping these people, the communities in a big way. And then what makes ecological restoration uniquely valuable is its inherent capacity to provide people the opportunities. That's very, very important. It is not just the conservation alone that counts. It provides economic opportunities. And it is also, as I told you, regenerates the traditional cultural practices and the general human well-being. The aspirations of the local communities are very much tied to this. So we need to respect that. Next slide, please. So restoration efforts are focused on few things, particularly improving biodiversity conservation, because this is fundamental to our survival. And then the improving livelihoods, human livelihoods. In many ways, nature's becomes business as well. To a certain extent, there are certain thresholds. Once you go beyond the threshold, then nature takes its own course, like what we see today in the pandemic situation. So there are limits to this livelihoods, what we derive out of it. We have to be very cautious about that. We should know our limits. And then empowering local people, that because, as I told you earlier, there is a repository of knowledge available with the local people, which has to be harnessed in a very sustainable way and made use of it in a very effective way, with married to the modern science to have effective outcomes. Then also it helps to kind of improve ecosystem integrity and productivity. Next slide, please. So key restoration challenges. There are so many challenges. What we are trying to understand is kind of we have only scratched the surface. It's a long way to go because each ecosystem is so different. There cannot be a one policy or one size fit all kind of an approach. Even forest systems are so different. It is important for us to understand the dynamics of the biodiversity within that system. That's where science helps us. The conservation biologists are there. They help us out there to understand those dynamics. And the restoration measures should be tailored to those kind of needs, local needs. That's an important first step because the diversity is huge. Particularly in a country like India, we have about 127 different agroclimatic zones. And each system has its own uniqueness. So that's why the history becomes the essence of history is very important because people have lived this life there within this context, and the place-based approaches becomes very, very critical for us. And these days we talk about the adaptive management. It means different things to different people. But then it is important for us to understand what kind of management tools one should use within a set context, what kind of human resources we need. All those things have to be mapped clearly. Again, I won't say we could have a 100% solution when you do all these things, but at least we are approaching this in a very scientific way so that the outcomes what we get are somewhat scientific and it has some certain dividends. So the adaptive management is certainly a critical component. We have been successful in adopting this in a longer time in different spaces, in various spaces of life. So that becomes a very critical component. And how to characterize ecosystems, this is also important because, when you talk about mangrove ecosystem, for example, there are different kinds of species available today. So it depends on what kind of species you're talking about. There are no homogeneous solutions for these things. So unless we understand those things scientifically, then appropriate measures we could come out with to strengthen the ecosystem restoration activities. So there are certain trade-offs as well, short-term versus long-term. One has to really look at it because particularly when you talk about resilience and adaptation, today's resilience becomes tomorrow's, it goes obsolete the day after, because there are lots of uncertainties involved when you talk about climate change. The only certainty about climate change is uncertainty. So we need to do the reality check continuously so that there is a good feedback loop of information flowing in so that we could raise to the occasion and plan accordingly and work accordingly, restore the systems. So then another biggest issue is the finance. That has been all developing countries face this issue. It is a very critical component of our negotiations as well, as you all know. Technology and finance and capacities are the three pillars of the negotiations before Paris Agreement. Now, not that we have achieved everything, but at least that is to some extent is a fair agreement given the history of it. So still there are huge gaps there, but certainly transfer of technologies is very critical. See what we are witnessing today within the vaccine scenario. That's a good example of how the few people control the technologies and the resources what they have. So I think India, being one of the primary producers of vaccines, we never thought we will hit this kind of scenario. Unfortunate, but certainly these are huge lessons to be learned. And as Professor Swaminathan always says, my guru, always says, every calamity is an opportunity, in the sense that there is so much to learn from every calamity. That's very, very important to be aware of those things. And, that's where the institutional memories also are very critical. So somehow, we have not really understood in the right light. And certainly those things that's why it all boils down to governance. To me, technology, we are good at technology, and certainly there are wonderful brains here to kind of, to work on the technologies, but then every technology has also a downside, as you all know. But it is also the question of governance, how do we kind of, how we could sensitize the politicians, the policymakers, to understand the realities, on the ground, what's happening. That knowledge should be fed in continuously to them. And that is a very critical component. And another important issue is, who has the rights? Property rights also come into the play, because particularly the women folks are very much deprived, the landless laborers and people, they have a role to play in the ecosystems, but there is no ownership for them. So access issues are plenty. We should also be mindful of that. These are some of the huge challenges. Next slide, please. Of course, there are a lot of opportunities. Certainly we are living in an age of technology and communications, which kind of, helps us in a big way to achieve a lot of things. The flow of information is there today, far better than what it was. So again, there are opportunities in different ecosystems. As you see there, I've pointed out a few: urban ecosystem, forestry, water, agriculture. These are the areas where we could work. And, sometimes it's very complex because of the kind of coordination, because we are also siloed in departmental functions. That is also a huge challenge, but we need to. And also it's important to bear in mind, one is the finance part of it. Secondly, the cost effectiveness of those solutions, whatever we have. We could come out with wonderful, upcountry technologies and whatnot, very sophisticated technology. But if it is not used by a common man, it is not going to make any sense. So that is another important, when the opportunities come up, we should see the ways to kind of, bring this ownership to kind of, sensitize the local communities, to kind of provide that kind of support in whatever we're doing. So that the demystification of science becomes very critical in those aspects. So the opportunities are plenty, but you have to be really careful of what we choose and how do we kind of really deal with those things. Next, please. So let me start with a few examples. First, I just want to move into the rivers and lake water ecosystems. Again, I want to reiterate, I'm not a technologist here, and I'm just kind of giving a flavor of things, what could be done, what has been successful, what are the best pathways, what we have, some of the options we have, and how do you kind of really
Saraswati, you want to try to contact him? And...
I'm just trying to do that. Lost.
human well-being, and also particularly the lake systems are vital for our freshwater ecosystems, for our survival, for our water needs and stuff. And also it delivers several ecosystem functions like flood control, sedimentation, recharging of groundwater, to pick up some examples. So it has multiple benefits we derive out of it. It's so functional. Then there is home to numerous flora and fauna and birds and aquatic species. That's a very common knowledge, but then it's important to recognize that. Next slide, please. So that some of the causes for degradation is certainly climate change, inadequate rainfall, and there are other manifestations of climate change. It's not just rainfall as well, temperature, the kind of gales and winds and storms and extreme events. They have certainly an effect on the ecosystems. And today, with development, dumping of industrial waste, I needn't emphasize much on that fact. You all know we live in a city where we see all these things day in and day out. And sand mining is another huge issue. None of the measures could control it. Still, at least there is some kind of understanding and recognition of that problem. And some of the problems are not even recognized. At least I'm happy that the past 10 years, at least, it is coming to the discussions fora. These kind of issues are repeatedly raised. The public awareness is going up to a large extent. These are good signs. And then all these things happened some 30, 40 years in the US, back in the US, because everything starts with the town hall meetings there. That's the kind of a democracy we need to have. I'm not saying that everything is good there. That's not my point. But in terms of how you value people's opinions and stuff, because they are the people who are living closer to the places of impact. So I'm reiterating this point because it should be inclusive and whatever the decisions what we make. So proliferation of bowels, we have seen that, particularly the OMR, horrible thing, for the past 10 years, the kind of development it is. You see the witness there. If somebody is going 250 meters down next apartment, which is about 250 houses, then they have to go 500 meters down. Where is the end for these things? Certainly, that's why regulations are not helping us in a big way. So it's time for us to think about this. The problem of eutrophication is also happening, and unplanned urbanization, the urban sprawl, and the sewage inflow. I needn't talk about all these things. And regulatory failures. We have all these things. This country is fantastic in coming out with the regulations. Absolutely, they're very good in books. All the problem what we have in implementation. Next, please. The intent is there, but you fail miserably in implementation. Then, what are the range of solutions? What you have? We have both the brown infrastructure solution, the green infrastructure solutions. These should go hand in hand. This engineering solutions are very critical, very important, but they have very limited shelf lives, as you know. So the maintenance is also an important step, where scramble for resources. There are several things, we have always found that, when we start a project, we come out with a very nice kind of infrastructure built in, but always we struggle to kind of maintain those things. That's why we have to resort to nature-based solutions, where, nature has the mechanisms to kind of, adjust these things. And, I'm not saying that we can bet everything on nature-based solutions, but a combination of that, that's where we should apply ourselves to come out with a right, good fit to see how we could balance these things. That should help us. And ecosystem-based adaptation is something which we talk about. There are two nomenclatures, say, in resilience when you talk about. One is the community-based adaptation and the ecosystem-based adaptation. One addressing the nature part of it, another one is looking at the people's part of it. But both of them are important. Ecosystem doesn't have a value without people there. And people have to be dependent on ecosystems. So they are interlinked heavily. And both the communities working on this should realize the value of each other. And some of the water quality monitoring certainly is an important thing. Use of quality monitoring is a very important thing today. More and more we get polluted. We need to use modern technologies and tools to understand and to measure, because I come from an agency, organization, which emphasizes a lot of importance to data. Data is the first step, the whole process in whatever we do. So we have the philosophy of our approaches: count it, change it, and scale it. So in terms of understanding that counting becomes very important, and then comes the implementation, and then the scaling up process takes place. So we should really be mindful of that. And use of high technologies, as I told you, there are no dearth of technologies today, but applying the right technology becomes a challenge in itself. That's half the problem is over when you really look at when you hit on the right technology. Then effective workable regulatory measures. That's, again, I've talked about it a bit. And limiting of anthropogenic activities. These are some of if we could tackle all this in some way or other, we certainly have good solutions. And community involvement is the bedrock of this whole thing. And awareness raising is also important. Next, please. Next slide, please. So let me move on to some of the examples. This work is done by IIT. I don't claim anything by this thing. Just going to give you a flavor of that. This is a about the lakes in south of Adyar River. When you talk of Chennai, we always know what comes to our mind is the Kosatalai River or the Kovam River and the Adyar River. These are the three important rivers which takes lots of load in terms of whether it's flooding or it is drainage, whatever it is. These are the three important rivers which provides that function. But we oftentimes forget there are umpteen number of water bodies there in terms of lakes, different sizes of lakes, which is functional, which has a certain element of certain roles in those things. But somehow, over a period of time, the functional elements of this have been neglected in a big way. I mean, we had a fantastic cascading system of lakes here. In Tamil Nadu, wherever you go, find our ancestors have looked into that. They have really applied the knowledge. Sustainable development, in other words, was practiced wonderfully. But then over the years, in the name of development, we haven't really paid much of attention to that, which has caused us a lot of damage. Next, please. This just to show the kind of lakes what we have. And then the 2015 flood, but the much talked about floods. We all lived that, so we know what it is. So I didn't really explain to you the vagaries of that and the difficulties what we underwent. But then it is important that is where we woke up a little bit. Still a long way to go, but at least it is certainly a curtain rises of what to come in the future with the climate change and the disaster risks what we were going to face in the next couple of decades. So it is certainly important to learn from there. This particular slide shows the 2002 the lake systems, what I talked about, the south of Adyar lakes, how they were. There is a clear flow pattern there, not much of obstructions there. There is a very clear thing. In 2005, the area was really, they started developing. And then 2015, the kind of proliferation of these things. So, absolutely, there is so much of obstructions there. It is all man-made. In 2015's floods, nevertheless, is one of the outliers, I would say. But still, much of that would have been prevented had we been really planning it well. If we have a planned city, we would have handled it differently. But it is certainly a man-made one as well. So it has been exacerbated by our own actions in many ways. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of a plan, prospective plan, put together by IIT. So it is important. First step, as I told you, in any kind of excessive restoration activities is scientific assessments. We need to really apply science to see what's going on there. Both in terms of people, how they are impacted, as well as these science behind it, to understand the dynamics of water, whatever. There are different ways to look at it, but it is important to be very scientific about it. We have different kinds of tools to be applied here, and we have to choose the appropriate tools. Here, in this case, they have looked at in the revival of lakes. They looked at using bathymetry, the water depth, geology of the lake beds and siltations, what kind of siltations we have, or what depth, what is there, what's going on there, in other words, and integrated groundwater assessment. It is not confined to the lake, what you're talking about, surrounding areas, how it has been impacted, because the lakes are a huge contribution in terms of recharging. So, what quality, both quantity of water that goes in has to be monitored and understood, as well as the quality of water, what we're talking about. So this is a master plan based on those things. They've come out, how to kind of connect those channels, the interconnections between the channels, the upstream, downstream kind of an effect, all has to be understood holistically. So the flooding patterns and things. So this is the first step in the whole thing. This is again, as I told you, it is an iterative loop, because things change over a period of time. We should revisit, update those information, the data, and then accordingly fine-tune or tweak our own methodologies and interventions accordingly. So that we have to be really sensitive to that. Next slide, please. So simple things like, bridging of the channels, water channels. It is an important activity. People oftentimes don't pay attention to that. This is a simple thing which could save a lot of water. Particularly the reaches also is faster. It's not only in terms of in transporting the water, also the kind of reach without any obstructions. And these are very simple investments, but still makes lots of sense, which have neglected for a longer time. With the proliferation of urban proliferation, the development, it ought to happen because we have never thought about it. In 2015, suddenly we woke up. Next slide, please. So this is again IIT's work. See the kind of the metamorphosis of this whole thing in our post 2015, the Pelican, these Siriseri twin lake rehabilitation process. What you see there is how wonderfully it has been. All this assessment has been done, and then try to understand the dynamics of the whole thing, what is happening around that, the groundwater recharge potential, everything. And then they kind of bridged that lake and came out with a good solution. In terms of, again, there are some kind of restrictions in terms of transporting the sediments. So they applied their mind to kind of create these wonderful mounds, which is converted into small biodiversity parks, and we have trails there today to kind of go around. So that's the kind of a vision. And again, when time changes, this might have other challenges as well. So that's how at least for now, it is the best way to kind of rehabilitate and restore what has been lost during the floods. So these are some of the good examples what you see there. Next slide, please. So as I told you, it's a holistic restoration becomes critical. It is not the engineering alone. We're going to solve the problems with the engineering solutions alone. Social engineering is also critical. The understanding of people's own needs is very critical. And also today, everything is tied up to business. Sustainable business models are very critical as well, because people derive a lot of livelihoods out of it. So it's important to kind of be cognizant of that and help them out in setting up small enterprises in a way that's not very harmful to the surrounding areas. So afforestation or environmental education and the best ways to use arts and culture. And traditionally, we have done that in many forms. Our stories are narrated through wonderful epics, and as Ramayana, Mahabharata, everything talks about it. So how do you make use of these things is also critical in a language that people could understand, relate to, a common man to relate to. And it's add values to his own knowledge what he has. So that reach is also becomes very important. So it is a very holistic approach one needs to have. Next, please. Next slide, please. So next one is about the Pelican marshland lake systems. As you know, is about almost 90% of the wetlands have been lost in the 40 years in Chennai. In the entire OMR, the IT industry has built on the wetlands, as you know. It's nothing new for you. It's nothing strange, but you know about it. But it is that's the kind of a height of development what we had, mad development, I would say, without any thinking, any accommodation of any future values to this whole ecosystems. Next, please. Next slide, please. This is the mapping of the flow of water. There are different lakes, as you say, within which drains into the Pelican marshlands, and there are so copious waters. It is kind of provides life to so much aquatic life as well. It is not only the human livelihoods that matter. It has certain services which are very visible, which are not visible as well. Groundwater recharge, as you know. So there are multifunctional elements associated with this. So these are the 4 or 5 lakes, and we look at one particular lake, the Sembrambakam Lake. Next slide, please. So this is something, the picture taken in 2002 in a pre-monsoon season. See how the lake was a bit dry and the surface area was very less. Particularly, you see the kind of sporadic development that is taking place in 2002. I mean, that's the millennial year close to now where the IT industry was booming as well at that point in time. So we could see the in and around that place and how it has been developing. And there are some modern eutrophication as well, which is taking place at that point in time. And next slide, please. In 2017, the post floods, you could see the difference. Enormous. This is really mad development which is taking place, very rapid in a span of about 10 years time. And one interesting thing what you could see, the lake has really expanded. You could see the size and depth of the rate has gone up. Can you say why it is? There's a very interesting fact. It is one baby because of the floods, 2015 floods. certainly brought lots of water to this area, but there are other human elements which are involved in it. The encroachments are because there is no drainage system there in this particular Sembramakum Lake at that point in time. Now they're trying to kind of work on that, but then all the sewage went into that lake. Then you could understand the status of it, the kind of services we derive out of it, with this very sub-quality kind of services. And eutrophication is also has gone up. Next slide, please. See the kind of, the weeds that's grown in, and, because of the rich nutrients what they have, but they have other detrimental effects like toxins. They release lots of toxins, which is not good for human consumptions as well as, aquatic life there. So eutrophication is certainly something which is battling in a modern world today. Next one, please. So these are some of the technologies that's been used to treat the water. That's what I talked about, the combination of the brown technologies and the green technologies. So there are different stages of technologies, say from primary screening to kind of, get out all the wastes which are there, the plastics to everything. It starts from there. Then the kind of a anaerobic treatment, and then, you kind of, use those technologies like settlers and other things, and use some of the combinations of, the green vegetation to filter those things. Constructed wetland is a fast growing area today. Now, US has been very successful in doing that to regain the water, to recharge the water, to regain the water systems to a larger level. It has helped. Of course, the technology might have some downside as well. One has to really study that very carefully so that we could appropriately fine-tune our own technologies, whatever it is. And they are apart in the last stage, they are also doing the electrochemical polishing treatments, and then the good water is being fed into the lake again. So these are the processes, So there's a combination of green and brown technologies, what you say. This is the way to go. And also we have no dearth of nature-based technologies in this country. One has to really document that. It is all buried in there. There's not even a good documentation which has taken place. Particularly in an urban context, it means a lot. The rural elements are comparatively still preserved to some extent, but then the urban places, we need these kind of technologies very urgently. Next, please. So this is another example from Vellore, the Nathaka district, the erstwhile Nathaka district. A few women folks got together to kind of restore the river flow through construction of over 600 recharge wells in these places and regenerated the whole area. It is a work done by, I think it is AOL, Art of Living, with the help of local NGOs. It is a fantastic work, it's to demonstrate the power of the women, and it also converted them into an enterprise. Now they are kind of helping other places, wherever there is a need. They're in fact doing that in a casting of those, the tubes and other things. They've been started an enterprise. They're thriving it on that, based on that. So it is a 15 years of hard work, and which has yielded good results today. So that's a good example. There are wonderful examples like that. Next, please. This is another example from Indore in Madhya Pradesh, where they've kind of created an island, because again, it is also important to recognize the hardware and software. It is not the knowledge should not be with the hands of few scientists. We go there and demonstrate and come back. Lots of hard hand-holding which has to happen. That's important to have long-term benefits. So they created a floating island with creating micro ecosystems for the flora and fauna. I was told that this system is. I had a chance to take a look at it sometime when I was there. But then we have to wait and watch. How this is. But these are very minuscule models. There are certain problems in scaling might be there. So it is important to understand what are the kind of parameters we should look at if there is a potential for scaling in it, and how do we kind of what kind of policies should be put in place to kind of scale this up. So all these are big questions. The capacity building is a huge component to it. Next, please. Now we will move on to another modern day challenge, that is a Ennur oil spill, which in the past 2 days we've been reading about what's happening in Sri Lanka. It is utter madness. 10 days the ship was burning and we couldn't really do anything. After kind of 10 days, we just kind of intervened, which is too late to do. Maybe they have some practical problems there, but still we should be in a position with the kind of technologies and the knowledge base what we have today. the 10 days is a long haul, which so much of damage it has caused to the ocean ecosystems there. So at this age, we should not be the information age, and with the kind of technology and the people, the expertise what is available today, we can't afford to kind of make this mistake. But anyhow, things are like that. It is a next, please. This next slide, please. Yeah, that I think it is 2017. I'm not sure. Again, the IIT was involved in the study. The ship collision which happened in a port, and you see the detrimental effect of this, and you see how devastating it was. It is also a kind of a new experience which is happening in our backyard. So lots of community pitched in, but still, now still the remediation work is going on. Next one, please. It made the headlines for so many days, and somewhat you could see we've been successful in some way in terms of treating the crude oil, the hydrocarbons and stuff. But still, the methodology, there should be some standardized methodologies. There are certain methodologies, but then we need to apply the right kind of methodology for the right kind of situations. As a place-based approach is very important, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Before and after treatment, what you see there. Now, Tamil Nadu Port, Madras Port has provided a huge land for them to experiment these things, and IOCL is heavily involved in this trial work. They're using the bacteria, oil-eating bacteria, in other words, to treat these things. So IIT has been provided the responsibility to monitor this. They've been working on that. I don't know the exact outcome of this, but they seem to have some, because today there are lots of technologies there, bioremediation technologies. So we need to use the appropriate tool. Let's see what the outcome of it. Let us wait for the outcome of this particular study to understand it better. And at least there are certain interventions which are taking place today. I just want to kind of give that flavor to you. Next slide, please. It is, again, I'm no expert in this to kind of go at length, explain to you what happened there, but it is just a kind of, to introduce you to this kind of different kinds of ecosystem management we have today. Next slide, please. So the same one, you see before and after treatment, after the bioremediation, you see this is a gas chromatograph. You see several compounds at the peak of it, at those times, how heavy it was impacted. And after the treatment, you see how it is kind of coming down. So yeah, it is for the scientists to make an inference on this. So at least some of the measures seem to be very successful. And how do we kind of extrapolate this to a larger region becomes another question. Next, please. So let me move on to the forest degradation. So this is one of the hotly contested areas, and India being houses a large tract of forest. But it means a lot to us, because lots of people's tribal livelihoods are dependent on forests. Not only that, it has several services, as even regulating climate, from soil, soil nutrients to kind of, so many functions it has. Wildlife, preserving wildlife. There are so many functions, as you know. So it's important for us to be taking care of this, forest degradation, which is very visible. And so it is, again, we have, over the years, we have come out with several measures, social forestry, whatnot, protected forest, we've seen so many, but still, each one has its own challenges. Social forestry is, at one point in time, it is supposed to be one of the very handy solutions, but then it is not anymore, because it is a kind of a monoculture, which has its own thing. Even you could talk about it as an example in early 60s, from what I read, every extension officer, because of the fuelwood crisis, what we had at those times, every extension officer was asked to carry some of the Prosopis julifloras, what you see, these big, trees in the wastelands, the thorny trees in the wasteland today. That has become such a huge menace. They were asked to disperse everywhere so that it could cater to the need of the poor and vulnerable to use this as a fuel wood. But that has turned out, that point in time, it is great. That's why we have to constantly kind of monitor the effects of those things. And today it has become such a menace, and all the good lands have been spoiled by that. So that's a good example. So there are different kinds of forests as well. The restoration technologies and the approaches what we use should be tailor-made to those kind of different forest setups and the kind of vegetative covers what you see there, the species diversity, all those things matter. Next slide, please. I'll just rush through this just to kind of give you a flavor. Again, the benefits what we derive of forests is monumental. There are so many benefits. Diversification of habitats. It is also maintenance of the integrity of the water cycle, and carbon sequestration is a very important function of the forest, as you all know. And it is also preservation of land use, land-based traditions and cultures and heritage. Next, please. And other benefits in the modern world, it is also the green jobs. We much talked about the green jobs, create rural green jobs and investment in sustainable growth. It is also a critical component. It is an important benefit we derive. And the benefits that provides, traditionally it has been there, providing some livelihoods for be it a non-timber forest produce, or whatever it is, people have been really making use of it for their livelihoods in a way that it is not even harmed, particularly in the tribal areas. They've been very cautious in harnessing those benefits. But today that is not happening. Yeah. Next, please. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a top-down, one-size-fits-all solutions, bringing people together to identify, negotiate, and implement practices. That is the social aspect is very, very critical. Being a social scientist, I've been researched so much on this, and there are different models, and human behavior is so different as well. It's not easy, dealing with people. The priorities are different. So I just want to flag that it is equally important as what you see in the sciences. It helps to promote optimal balance of ecological, social, and economic benefits. And the biggest advantage what we have in a setup like India is the social capital, which we often tend to forget. Social capital plays a very, very critical role. After post-tsunami, I've personally witnessed this. People from all parts of the world, all parts of the country, from Gujarat, because they've experienced the earthquake. They just had the backpacks, the youth, they just took the train. They don't know the language. They don't know the geography of this place, nothing, all the passion and the intention what they had. That social capital has to be harnessed in a way. And we have seen that Chennai is no inferior in that sense. We've seen time and again during the floods, how people organize themselves. And today, the social media and the tools what we have has really enhanced that kind of network and the reach. So I'm very optimistic about these things, but a kind of a concerted effort from the government and the non-governmental organizations and the citizens are very critical in dealing with this kind of challenges. Next, please. Some of the characteristics of this, there are different kinds of forests, as I mentioned, so there are different kinds of treatments we have. I'm not going to delve deep, but then it just gives a flavor of, the kind of characteristics, restore functionality and productivity. Some of the forests look just for that sake, because another important thing when you talk about forests, it is not randomly doing some plantation. That is why always, you have to look back. When you look back, the rich kind of ecosystem, what you're seeing in the sacred groves and our own traditional systems, because these are the biomarkers of the region. The keystone species of that region is preserved there, while the other surrounding areas have gone, have damaged and degraded. Those patches still stand, so they are the indicators of the native species. So that has to be preserved and studied well, so that we are not bringing anything alien to the setup there. So that it doesn't only stop there. It doesn't stop there. It is also kind of bringing back the kind of a natural biodiversity which was existing years back. So the value of keystone species are very critical in forest ecosystems. That has to be understood the way that should be. Thanks. Next, please. So there are particularly three kinds of restoration, what we see largely practiced across the globe. One is the wide-scale restoration. It is generally in the sparsely populated areas where the land use pressure is low and forests can grow more freely. So there are certain technologies to do that. Again, one has to understand the profile. The data becomes very critical. WRI runs the Global Forest Watch. It provides the real-time analysis and real-time data of, where the forests are right now, where the forest fires are there. With the touch of the button, you could see there's a major project in collaboration with Google. It was implemented for the past 4 or 5 years. Even the poachers have been identified, and to that level of, in Africa, they could, in Indonesia, so that's the level of detail we could go into today with the application of technology. And the next one is the massacre type restoration, where small scale restoration within the landscape with mixed forest and non-forest, where it is kind of, mixed with agricultural use and stuff. You could see patches of agriculture within the forest, and agroforestry also comes very handy in these types of restoration efforts. And then remote opportunities for reforestation. This is completely, where no people are there. It is very remote areas. It's far more easier to maintain and work on that. So unpopulated areas. There are 3 different kinds of restoration efforts put in the forest ecosystem. Next, please. So this is another example from Odisha, where single-handedly a lady farmer, Sabamati, she has demonstrated 2.5 acres of plot, but cultivated about 800 varieties of traditional plants over 3 decades. That's what I'm saying. There are lots of knowledge here. There is no dearth of knowledge. It's a question of how do you bring it together in a way that it's scalable, and the exchange of knowledge becomes very critical. And so this is a wonderful example of a single-handedly how we could also see this across Ethiopia as well, how community have come together. I mean, this is millions of hectares of land, have been transformed. And next slide, please. The next one is, much talked about, the Miyawaki forest restoration. I'm still trying to understand what it is. And Chennai particularly is very keen on that. In Kotrapuram, you see this in patches of this forest. And that seems to be a good kind of a solution for a urban forest setup, urban forestry, to promote urban forestry. Then, there are dense forests within a small patch of land, and also it vigorously grows. That's what they claim, 30 times denser than the original forest. But at what cost? One has to look at the downside of it, because photosynthesis is very critical for a good ecosystem, the species diversity. If you are going to suppress that, because this is with limited shades, so that the weeds are not going. That's the advantage what you see. But what are the kind of trade-offs what you have that have to be really looked at? But there are good models. One should not really point fingers and say that this is bad or not, but we need to really study these to see how it fits to our own situations. Next, please. So most restoration potential is with the opportunities are tropical, and as you all know, it is no rocket science. Everybody knows that, because the kind of diversity it brings in. But again, the ecosystem services is also multifold to restore the tropical ecosystems compared to the temperate and boreal ecosystems for us. And we have major challenges like the bond challenge, which India is also committed to party to that, to kind of millions of hectares have to be brought in under this plan, so that we could revegetate our areas. And Africa was also going in a very big way to do this. Next slide, please. So I won't take too much of time, another couple of slides. And then this is the restoration potential available across the world. India certainly has a sizable potential. Next, please. So let's move on to the coastal ecosystems. Again, this is also another thing which really impacts us in a big way, because India is a country which has about 7,000 kilometers of coastal area, and we have so much of lessons we have learned from the rehabilitation of coastal areas, and there are good models. And certainly this is far more visible in a climate context, because even there are slow onset events and the extreme events. Slow onset events are more to do with droughts, and we don't get to see them, so we don't really relate it to that well. Whereas a storm or a cyclone, it's so visible, and we experience this so well, and people also reacted so fastly, and it is also they could really provide good solutions because they're experiencing it day in day out with the frequency of the storms going up today. So one of the examples is the mangrove ecosystems, which is much talked about, and it does multifunctions like storm protection. After tsunami, you've seen that absolutely particularly the commendable work done by MS Swaminathan Research Group Foundation for the past 20 years have saved people in Pichavaram. There's published in Science as well, how particular patches of mangrove ecosystems were saved, and people have been saved, and their livelihoods were saved longer time. So it is a very important ecosystem function. It's not just the the services we derive out of it, it is also the lives that have been saved, particularly mangrove ecosystems. So there are different regulations, it kind of services it provides, coastal flood regulation, and it is also habitat to different kinds of fishes because they kind of hatch. Spawning takes place under the roots of mangroves. There are different species available. So there are also provision of products like timber, honey, and TFPs. You can name them, and it has more importantly, it has a huge carbon sequestration potential in today's world that matters so much as well. Next please. So this is another example from MSSRF, the saline banks and Muthupat mangroves, how it has been revived. Now the wetland boundaries, what you see there, right, is a old photograph, probably around the mid-90s, I think. I don't exactly date back that. Let's see. Next slide, please. So this is the kind of observed stagnation prior, how it has been it is degraded over a period of time. There is no free flushing and water stagnates. Normally it should flow so that the salinity doesn't affect the water. I mean, being a saline tolerant species, but still mangroves have certain level of tolerance, any plant for that matter. So if it goes beyond, then it affects the plant. And that's what you've seen. And the microtopography has changed over a period of time because of the inundations and the stagnation of salt water over a long period of time. Next, please. So this is the topography healthy area where you see smooth topography, free flushing happens, and soil salinity is within the limits. And pore water salinity is also very moderate and high diversity of species. And because of that, there are high diversity of species. Once this is disturbed, then it becomes a problem. Next slide, please. See, this is the degraded one where you have a trough there. That is where the water stagnates. As a result of that, the salinity is up and the species diversity comes down. And people dependent on this for livelihoods. Their life is also affected because they don't get the kind of good harvest which they used to get normally. Dead mangroves you've seen there. So many dead mangroves there. Next, please. And then, there are a variety of tools to corroborate the information. As you know, one is by observations, and then, having focus group discussions with the people there who are living the life there, also through the application of remote sensing technologies today. And we could see how things change over a period of time. Next, please. So these are some of the reasons of degradation, the findings from the study. I'm not going to delve deep into that. But there is a systematic approach. That's what I'm trying to say. So that science is very helpful for us to understand the right light. Next, please. So based on the assessment, they came out with a development of canal system for flushing so that the topography the integrity is maintained. At the same time, there is a good source of flushing. And they've identified the engineering for that to do this work. Next, please. Then before restoration, you could see the difference, in about 7-8 years of time, they could see the difference. There are again mangrove nurseries raised, and then there is also joint forest management effort, bringing people together and understanding the needs, and their own technologies also used in this kind of rehabilitation process. Next, please. So this is the extent of mangroves today. About 1,400 hectares of land has been recorded, if I understand, in Pichavaram. So because of those efforts. So this is a real good success story. Next one, please. So let me move on to climate change. I'm not going to delve deep. This is a common knowledge today, but it is also important for us to understand the impacts of it and the basic parameters, as we all know. Temperature, rainfall, sea level rise, and the extreme events are important parameters which are affecting. It affects different systems in different ways. Some of them are direct, some of them are not. Health is certainly a major impact on health, livelihoods, water regimes, and a change in vegetative profiles, what you've seen, and the vector-borne diseases. There are very well documented. Science speaks volumes of it, and I needn't really. People are unequivocal about the detrimental effects of climate change, though there are some naysayers today. But still, science has proved its point. Next, please. So the ecological impacts, I just want to touch one or two because, particularly in a forest ecosystem, it affects the range and the timing of biological activity, the growth rates. There are so many things, the invasive species, because of the higher temperatures, it is prone to kind of, letting in new invasive species. But over the period of time, it might have different kinds of effects. Relative abundance of species, cycling of water and nutrients. These are some of the disturbances, what you see. Fire, insects, and the rate of fires, in Australia, what we witnessed a few years back, couple of years back, is a story in itself, though people might not directly relate it to climate change, but still it has an effect, in terms of the kind of loss we cannot even compensate over many decades to come. So next slide, please. So one of the things, fundamentally what we know is, the biological cycles of different species also impacted in many ways. See, there are early hatching. It takes place in certain varieties in certain forest, forest areas. So this is, the birds are confused in certain areas, because the spring is early and, it's not coinciding with their own biological cycles. These are some of the effects. The scientists have been studying this and they're carefully documenting these things, practices as well, what is going on there and how to kind of deal with this. Migrating birds also arriving earlier because of the kind of changes that are taking place. So next, please. So we need to now move from conservation to restoration to resilience. So whatever I talked about so far as a meaning for resilience, resilience is, as you all know, in simple terms, it's in a very holistic way, bouncing back to the original status, as Coling defined it in the 60s. But we cannot really, that is an utopia today. We cannot really bounce back to the original status. It's going to be very difficult because of the kind of development which is taking place, the changes which are taking place at rapid pace. Even if you could bounce back at a level closer to what it was, then it is a success. So we cannot dream of bouncing back completely to the original status and restore those things. But we have to be prepared for the new normals. That is the order of the day, either we like it or not. Within that, how deviant it is, how far we could go closer. That's the question. And that's what resilience is about. And being proactive, factoring all those things into the equation of our strategies and trying to kind of build back better, in whatever way. It is not that completely going to be all right, but at least, we have certain tools to kind of understand and work towards that. In essence, that's what resilience is about. And we have inherent, particularly people here, our resilience is far more than the other societies in many senses. I mean this because the kind of, in the competitive world we live in, even it has a behavioral aspect, for everything we have to. You look at the ration shops. If you go there, we see that, how, because that's how our life is like surrounding around that, because that behavioral component is very, very critical. That's why I just want to mention that. That applies everywhere. And, we have to have a balance between the natural resilience, the natural ecosystem resilience, and how do you adapt to that kind of new normals is also a part of resilience. And we are there, but we are all still learning. Next, please. So in simple terms, I just want to kind of, this is a simple resilience framework I want to kind of present, in the sense that, we should understand first resilience to what? System of process, what context, is it the forest ecosystem, agricultural ecosystems? What are we talking about? And then the resilience to what? Resilience of what and resilience to what? The different kinds of shocks. For a drought, there are certain measures one has to really take. Or a flood infested area, the resilience measures are different. So for a coastal area, it's different. So to what shocks we have to really, that has to be studied and understood in the context. And capacity to deal with the disturbances are different, because these are the typical understanding of vulnerabilities. We use these 3 parameters of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So that is where we lag in the adaptive capacity. It is governed by the finance, what you have, the social capital, or the technology. But we, poor people, don't have the access to those things. And again, reactions to the disturbance, it might be closer to bounce back better. That's what I said. It's not completely bouncing back to the original state of affairs. But then, sometimes it collapses as well. There are different, pathways to that, and we have to see, pick and choose where we go and what are the kind of pathways we adopt. Means lots to resilience. Next, please. So then I've talked about it enough. I'm not going to skip this. Nature-based solutions provides the answer to this thing with a balanced effort, and particularly critical at this point in time where we are undergoing this pandemic, we see how important it is. To even within IIT campus, we see a lot of regrowth of vegetation, as well as because of the disturbance during the lockdown, non-disturbance during the lockdown, the deer population is also going up. This, I could witness that over a period of time. But again, it's a question of time. Once the campus opens, things will be different. That's how that's life. I'm just saying, where do you draw the line becomes the question. Again, we have also been very happy about bringing down the GHG emissions around the world during the lockdown time last year. But then once the production starts, they're going to go shift the gear and go in aggressive mode, so that it will double the production and double the emissions that's going to take place. Next, please. So another 1 or 2 slides, that's it. Ecosystem resilience and a target reduction of vulnerabilities of population, because we have to bear this in mind. The rich and the affluent have the ways to kind of, even for the vaccine case, you could see the inequity that is prevailing. The people who have the resources, they have the wherewithal, they could always manage to get the vaccines. Always, whatever it is, the poor, vulnerable, are the affected the most. So, yeah, next, please. Yeah, it is also co-benefits. It's not just the resilience alone. We also contribute to we're also strengthening our mitigation activities, and the carbon sequestration particularly offers a lot of opportunities for us when you do resilience. It's like a double benefit we get, and whatever we do to strengthen the resilience aspect of it. Next, please. So the story kind of ends here in the sense that we started with that, the disturbance and what we see in the natural ecosystems, and now it is we should make sure that it provides a quality kind of ecosystem services, be it water, forest, or the air to breathe, whatever it is, and much depends on the sustainable adaptive management what we provide, and how we're taking care of nature, and how we kind of raise ourselves to the needs of the day and act upon that. Next, please. Final slide. It talks about looking ahead. The scientific assessment, I want to reiterate this point. There are umpteen number of tools available, though we have a set of tools, but then we have to pick and choose to the conditions what we are looking at. That becomes, and also it is it's important to marry this science with the local knowledge and stuff. And building a robust database, I cannot emphasize that. That is one of the biggest weakness in our country, but I'm not very pessimistic about it. We are coming a long way. Even the IMD data today is far more robust compared to what it was 20 years back. So we are there, but still a long way to go. It's the quality of data also that counts, and the access to data is another thing that also, because we have to promote citizen science. There are, as I mentioned, we have to understand what people in day-to-day life face and how they are. That data becomes very valuable in coming out with a restoration solution. And then understanding the entry points for interventions, because again, we cannot have the same entry points for different, because the sense of history has to be understood in a particular area where we are working. Application of appropriate technology and monitoring and evaluation becomes critical, because that provides the feedback loop. So the mid-course corrections could be done at the right stage. Otherwise, tomorrow it becomes maladaptation, and we have to bear the brunt of it. And harnessing and promoting citizen science and capacity of local communities at different levels, the institutional capacities as well. That's where the institutional memories are very important. Then the mobilization of finance, I can't emphasize enough. The private sector's role is very, very critical. And I'm realizing that I'm talking to the community here, the Madras Chamber of Commerce. Their role is far more fundamental in terms of how to kind of provide those services in a better way to bring a quality of life to the citizens. And building a business model has become critical, so that people also could make a living out of it in a very less harmful way. I'll stop here. It's a long talk. I'm sorry, I've been a bit of a stretch, but I thought it's important on this important occasion, what I could say. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Nambi. And I would now straightaway request Mr. Venkatachalam, the chairman of our Energy Committee and part of our Sustainable Chennai Forum, to take the floor or take the screen. Over to you, Mr. Venkat.
Yeah, I think overall, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Overall, I think very well covered I think a lot of things which came out in the talk that you were given. First of all, for every negative action, there is an equal and opposite positive reaction. That's one thing that I can see, that you ended up with a note of positive, optimistic note. We may have the Trumps who may be not very ecologically friendly, but we have the tribes in India or various places of the world who do everything to protect the ecology around them. One of the examples was the Bishnoi tribe that we heard of in the Black Buck incident. They have got a set of, they're almost like treated as almost like a religion, that there are a lot of things that they do to protect the environment overall. I think you covered the water bodies, the forests, the mangroves, the climate change, and the restoration and the resilience very well. And in a lot of things that we learned from the lecture and giving an overall perspective. Then talking of the not just the intent, but the implementation that you emphasized on, that the implementation is something which is we need to improve a lot on. Intent is there in patches, but this needs to spread across the world. And as we are all aware that any awareness, the awareness such as this that you've just talked about would always lead to action. And I'm sure over the next few years, with a lot more awareness, with the social media being so active, action would definitely take place. I can see a lot of it happening, but at the same time, the kind of things that we do to the ecology for economic benefit, though you don't realize eco is not just eco, I mean, damaging eco, but it has a long-term impact. It's actually positive for the environment and the economy as such. So with these few words, I think, thank you very much, Dr. Nambi Appadurai. Very, very interesting and very gripping the way you covered it in a very short span of time. In fact, quickly, there is a question I can see on the screen. There are a few, this thing, due to deforestation, are we losing coral reef and getting more number of, for the natural disaster? Then how to overcome, I'll just read out all the questions, how to overcome this and what are the effective measures that can be taken? And how do we balance eco-restoration with livelihood issues, for instance, in the case of monocrop plantations? Do you think there is a diversification of crops in the plantations that we could, a practical remedy for this? And are there economic models or templates that can be used to calculate benefits of restoration activity, etc.? So just a few, I mean, if you could cover it in a brief.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me answer the eco-restoration question first. It's a very proven thing that, monocrop leads to kind of, problems. We've seen in agriculture setup as well as the forest ecosystems. The simple fact that, the pest infestations will be very homogeneous. So, the magnitude of this infection, these infestations are very high when in a homogeneous setup. Always, it happens. And that's what happened with the eucalyptus planting under the social forestry. So, particularly it has a tendency to kind of, soak all the water, groundwater. So always this is and also to protect the nature of the biodiversity, we need varieties. Absolutely, it is very, very, it's one of the basic things, and the diversity is important for the genetic diversity is very important for the future as well. So, where do the agricultural crops today, whatever we have, come from? Because of the kind of diversity what we had, the traditional crops, which are very rich in pest tolerant, drought tolerant qualities, saline tolerant qualities, which is being used in modern science today as biotechnology. So I think that is a very, very fundamental thing to have good, rich ecosystems. But it not just stops with the trees, because the kind of diversity what you have in other terms, it's other species also, is important contributions of it to that. Okay, and the deforestation and the losing of coral reefs. I mean, I don't see any direct connection because maybe my knowledge is also limited there. I can't just speak for the marine ecologists, probably would be a better question to answer the question. But any deforestation has certain effects to the, it's a fundamental thing, right? It has a cycle and it contributes to the rain and, the weather patterns are changing because of the forest, lose the forest cover. So in that sense, certainly it affects also ocean cycle in some way. And that is the direct thing. And also it is also happens because the acidification, when there is a limited rain, there's acidification, which is has an impact on the coral reefs in a big way, ocean acidification. So there must be some kind of a undercurrents on that, to really probe into that in little detail. I know I've not answered it thoroughly, but these are the connections of what I see. Thank you. And the next one on the economic models or templates that can be used to calculate benefits of restoration activity. Yes, it is an emerging area, a developing area, particularly the RED plus and other instruments which are coming up because the cost benefits have to be understood. If you want to go to kind of, if you want to have finance from developed countries, it's important to know what you want to ask, the magnitude of the money, what you ask. And so, things are moving in the direction, but I'm sure there are certain models which could be applied. Already the established models could be applied to restoration activity as well. So let me keep it that simple, but certainly there are. But we have our own. I could connect the person who wanted it, the economist who is working in this area in the WRI. So she'll have a better understanding of that, provide some kind of a solution to you. I'd be happy to connect. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nambi Appadurai. And Ms. Saraswati, you'll be concluding remarks. Do you have any?
Nothing much. You can do that and then probably thank everyone.
Okay, thank you everyone for being a very good participation that we could see, and thanks all, and thanks to Dr. Appadurai, who's really taken us through all the aspects of the environment that we need to protect. With this awareness, I'm sure we'll look forward to more greener times and pandemic-free times for all future to come.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure being part of this. I'm sorry it is a bit of bad drag in the sense that because of the because I wanted to really cover so that people get a perspective of it. I know
we enjoyed it.
That with me. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Safe weekend. Happy weekend, please.
Thank you.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.